Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome to our second webinar. Um, I am Diane Jacotot, the Managing Director of Edvectus, and with me is Glenda Parks, who is a teacher recently returned from China. So what we're going to go through first is just a quick introduction, a discussion of the kinds of international schools and opportunities there are, salary and benefits, what you can expect. Then we'll turn the screen over to Glenda and have Glenda answer some questions about her experience. We'll look at what schools look for when hiring expatriate teachers, some requirements, limitations, timelines, and then questions. So I would ask everyone who's on the webinar to please put some of your questions in the question and answer session so we can make sure to answer them. Okay, so just a quick introduction. I am the founder and managing director of Edvectus. Edvectus is 10 years old actually this month. And we are a company that is mainly staffed by ex-teachers with international experience. And our role is to really match teachers with jobs. We don't charge teachers a fee like a lot of American companies do. And we don't employ the teachers. The schools employ the teachers. So we act as a clearinghouse kind of to match you to jobs. Glenda is an English teacher who started her career at a large government school in South Africa. And in 2011, she took the big leap to move to China, where she was an English teacher and then later head of department for an international school in Shanghai. Glenda has returned to South Africa this year after over 10 years in China, and she's taken up a job as an online teacher at the British School of Ukraine, through Edvectus, actually. So there you go. And she's happy to talk to us about her experiences in China. So let's move right along. So just an overview of international schools in China. People do get confused when we're looking at them. And I just want to say that there are schools for teaching English as a foreign language. And these are non-compulsory. They could be for children, they could be for adults. And generally those require a degree and a passport from an English-speaking country and a TEFL certification, a 30-hour TEFL cert. Of all the kinds of schools that there are in China, these tend to be the lower salaries and benefits. It isn't compulsory education, and the bar in terms of getting hired is lower. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. If you only have a degree and a TEFL certificate, this is what's accessible to you. But at the same time, it's accessible to more people, so the salary and benefits are lower. The next kind is a private Chinese school. So there are state schools in China and there are private schools in China. And some private schools have an international stream. And there's a really wide variety of these kinds of schools and these kinds of international streams. Some I've seen hire people with just a degree and a TEFL certificate, or a degree and a PGCE or a full teacher certification. It depends on the stream. On the whole, they tend to be on the lower or moderate end of the salary and benefit scale. The next is bilingual schools for Chinese children. So these are brand name bilingual schools that are meant for Chinese children, very rich Chinese children. And on the higher tier, there's some very high tier schools doing this. They will look for the same thing that any international school, which is a degree in a PGCE or a Bachelor of Education or US teacher certification. So by and large, there are a variety of different kinds of bilingual schools, but there are some that are quite, well, they pay as higher than any international school. So you can't know the kind of bilingual school it is just by the name. And finally, there are schools for the children of foreign workers. Now, these are schools that require the children to have a foreign passport. Doesn't mean that the children are not Chinese, because there are a lot of Chinese children that might have a passport from, I don't know, Burkina Faso or Hong Kong or Canada. There are a lot of children who, if they have lived abroad and they're Chinese and they come back, they can access these schools. But technically, they're for foreign passport holders only. These schools usually require a degree and a PGCE or a full US teacher certification. So the same kind of qualifications that you need to teach in a school a primary or secondary school at home, you would need to teach in these schools. And they range from moderate to very high salary and benefits. And I'll give you some idea of what those are. In terms of the number of schools, China has over 1,000 international schools. And the way that they define, there is no world definition of an international school, but the way that ISC Research defines international schools is they have a language of instruction or curriculum that is different than the host country. So these are compulsory education schools. They have about 10% of the world's total schools, and it's been that way for a while. International schools or international bilingual schools started in the first tier cities of Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And then they later moved on to second tier cities or new first tier cities. These are terminology that's quite unique to China, and it's not an official terminology, but first tier cities are just the big ones, the big multinational kind of cities where a company might be headquartered. Second tier cities are the next wave. Now, the size of the cities, even though you've never heard of them, is quite astounding. And I thought I would. I mean, everybody's heard of Beijing and Shanghai. Not everyone's heard of Guangzhou or Shenzhen. Guangzhou is actually one of the biggest cities in China, and there's 15 million people, which is almost twice the size of New York City, Greater New York. So Hangzhou and Ningbo are cities that you might not have ever heard of. Those are as big as London, Greater London. So it's hard to describe the scale of these cities. Just because you've never heard of them does not mean they're insignificant, because they are. They are very significant. There's also a lot of money in China. They have had one of the fastest growing world economies. And in these first and second tier cities, a lot of the wealth is aggregated. So these schools that are being built are really, whether they're for foreigners or whether they're for Chinese students, they're quite prestigious and they can be quite expensive. There are a lot of brands, high profile brands, from Harrow to Dulwich to Dwight. I could go on. There's dozens and dozens of top quality brands. Chinese people are quite brand conscious and they have the money to do so. And so these foreign schools, looking to kind of expand, have seen this as a really greenfield opportunity. But just be aware that a lot of the brands might be franchises. And what that means is to open up a school in China, you have to have a Chinese partner, and that partner may have more or less influence over the school. So just because something is called a brand that you've heard of, a British boarding school that you might know, it doesn't mean that that will be the exact replica of that British boarding school in China, right? So just do a bit of research. Brands are important, but they don't mean the same thing in China that they do outside of it. In terms of curriculum, if you're looking at a TEFL curriculum, teaching English as a foreign language, there is no curriculum to speak of. It's whatever works. But at the end, they end up usually with some kind of a test like an IELTS. Bilingual schools, these use the Chinese curriculum at upper primary and early secondary. And then it's topped and tailed by an international curriculum. So for instance, it might use the British curriculum or Montessori at kindergarten level. Then they go on and do the Chinese curriculum in the middle. They finish up at, say, 14, and then they go on to do GCSEs, A-levels, IB diploma, advanced placement, those kinds of things. So this is for Chinese children who might want to go to university outside of China. Schools for children of foreign workers are international schools. Now, they will use a fully international curriculum within the boundaries of Chinese regulation. So the Chinese authorities, for instance, are quite touchy about, I don't know, Tibet. And so you just don't go there, or you go there in the way that they tell you to go there. So there are always going to be, in any foreign country, they're going to modify the curriculum somewhat. And that is true in China. In terms of pay and benefits, typical are 2-year contracts, although you can get 3. From an international school, so if we're looking at a mid-range to upper tier bilingual or international school, you're going to get your visa by the school, you're going to get flights, medical, you're going to get a housing allowance or possibly housing, all provided by the school. I will say flights can vary. So some are booked and paid for by the school. Some give you an allowance. Some give you a refund upon arrival. Some do it at the beginning and end of 2 years. Some do every year. So this is going to vary by school. And so this is something that you just need to be aware of when you're looking at different opportunities. Housing is normally allowance because housing is easy to find. But do make spot checks when you look at the housing allowance to make sure that it covers the full cost in the city that you're looking at, because housing costs vary. So just because there's a housing allowance doesn't mean it covers everything. At top tier schools, it usually does and more. But if you're looking at the mid-range, then it might not. Medical insurance can be very expensive in China, so make sure that it's covered. Normally it is to some extent, but if you have a family or dependents, that will vary by the school. So just make sure that if you are bringing a family or dependents, that you get the medical insurance or that you know the cost of it if you have to buy it. Attestation is the process of getting your paperwork authenticated by your home country and travel to get your visa. So the visa is processed while you're outside of China, and there's a whole process to get it. And that the travel costs and the attestation costs may not be covered. So just check on that. It's usually not a huge cost, but it's something to be aware of. And other benefits, professional development allowances, utilities allowance, baggage allowances. I've even seen laundry allowances. It's all over the place. There are all kinds of things that you can get. Generally, they're not game changers, but it's just something to be aware of. International streams and bilingual schools may not be suitable or affordable for dependents. So just make sure that you know what kind of school you're applying to if you've got children who will accompany you. Not all schools are family friendly. Some might not consider anybody with children. Some might charge you a partial tuition. Again, those flights, medical tuition, it might be a lot of money out of your pocket if it's not provided. So it could make even what looks like a good job, it could make it unaffordable. So just do your maths when you're looking at different jobs. And I would say that if you're going through Edvectus, we tend to match you. So we wouldn't we would only match you with ones that we think you would be affordable for you, or if they're not, we'll flag it up. Bonuses are compulsory in the Middle East. So in the Middle East, gratuity is by law. And China has actually caught on to that. So they want to be competitive with the Middle East. And so many schools are giving you bonuses, whether at the end of contract, the end of the year. Some are performance-based, so it's going to be, are you going to get it or you're not? But some are actually like gratuity and they're guaranteed if you finish out your contract. And they can typically range from 5 to 10% of your salary, which is a nice little wad of cash. Other considerations, most salaries in China are quoted before tax. There are some schools that quote them after tax. So just be aware of which way you're getting it, because 20 to 30% can make a big difference. And if you're comparing apples to oranges, it doesn't make sense if you're comparing a before and after tax school and thinking that they're the same. It is a progressive tax in China, and it varies between cities. Cost of living varies between cities, and I would recommend you use a website. There's a couple of them, Expatistan and Numbeo are the two that we use. But just to show you that compared to London, Shanghai is 48% cheaper. So your buying power in Shanghai is 48% cheaper. Beijing, 53% cheaper, and Chengdu is almost 60% cheaper than London. So this is, when you're looking at salaries and packages, you just have to be aware of how far your money goes, because the less money you spend on stuff, the more money you save. And I would say that, having been to China multiple times, and Glenda, I'm sure will attest to, your money goes a lot further in China. Salary ranges. So I did put some stars on this. It varies, but I'm giving you a range. It'll vary depending on the school, the city, and your experience. So a teacher with only 2 years of experience is going to be at the lower end. A teacher with 25 years experience is likely going to be at the upper end. I quote salaries in the local currency per month, and that's how we do it on our website. But I've given you an approximate what it's worth today. But just know that when you get paid, you're getting paid in RMB, and so the exchange rates can vary over time depending on what different governments are doing. So in a top tier school in a top tier city, you're going to be looking at 26 to 50,000 RMB per month, which is a pretty penny. It's around 3,000 to 5,600 pounds per month. Again, you're taxed on this, so just be aware of that, but it's still a lot of money. At a lower tier school or a lower tier city, it does vary a lot, but you're going to be looking around 14 to 28,000 RMB per month, which is 16,000 to 3,000 pounds per month. So that is the range that you'll be looking at. Every school, even there are two schools in the same city, in the same tier, they're going to be paying you different amounts of money. I wouldn't recommend you get fixated on the exact amount because the package matters so much and the experience, your quality of your experience matters so much. But this gives you an idea of why people are going to China, because of the magical combination of the cost of living being quite low and the salaries being quite high. All right, so I am going to turn it over to Glenda. And Glenda, I'd like to start by just having you describe how your school in China was the same or different to what your school was at home, and kind of what should teachers be prepared for.
Okay, well, I have taught in a number of schools in South Africa, but when I left, I'd been teaching in a big government boys' school. And it was in a city, so very busy and lots of weekend sport commitments. You get to China and that is totally different. It doesn't, sport is 6-week seasons or maybe an 8-week season. There's very little commitment over the weekend, if anything, but your day is a lot longer. So I was working at least an hour longer a day than I was back home. And because the students are keen to learn and they want to learn, you're actually teaching more because you need to, you're not babysitting, you're not being a policeman, you're not trying to get everybody to keep quiet, and you're actually teaching. So you are engaging with the students full on all the time. So that would be a big difference. The other really, the cool difference is that you've got people from all over the world. So you've got people, so you're meeting different people, different cultures, different experiences. And one of the things I had to unbundle in my head was the way I did it and the way we did it in South Africa. And suddenly you're exposed to a range and multiple experiences, and people are coming from such different systems, and you had to find common ground and work out what works in your school. So there was a lot of unbundling in my head and sort of rethinking things. And it also depends on the makeup of the staff. So if you have a heavy British contingent, then sort of you tend to go the British way. If you get a lot of Americans, you go the American way. So it depends. We eventually had a big South African contingent, so we were very happy about that. But I've never, honestly, when I got there, I'd been teaching for 20 years. I've never worked so hard in my life. You work incredibly hard. There is a huge demand on your time, and the preparing and getting ready, there's it's a lot, and learning into the IB system, that was a huge learning curve, but so rewarding. It was so rewarding because it was about learning, and I've learned so much over my time there, more I think than the students did. So it's incredibly rewarding, but you work really hard.
And you were at an international school, right? You were at Yucheng in Shanghai.
I was in the top tier, top city, and so definitely, you know, people will say, "Oh, you teach English." It's like, no, I'm not teaching in a TEFL school. I'm teaching like I would teach English at home.
Indeed, yeah. Indeed. And what would you say, what are the Chinese people like? And how did they react to you as a foreign teacher?
So our school actually had a Chinese department because the students all had to learn Chinese, but it wasn't a bilingual school because everything else was in English. And honestly, so welcoming and so friendly that I never ever felt like I was out of place. So at school, it was incredible. I was also part of a church community, same experience, extremely welcoming, wonderful. I think in the beginning years when I got there, maybe a few stares because you are different, because you're a foreigner. And if you go inland and to other cities, you definitely stick out. You definitely are not the same. And so you do get people who are curious, but they're curious. They're not, they can come across as rude, but they're not. They're just curious. The Chinese people are incredibly, naive is not the right word, but they're quite, they want to believe the good. They have grown up in the communist system. And so the government, what the government says, they kind of, go along with. And so they're very accepting of different things. So if anything happens and the government says, this is what's going to happen, there's very little kickback. So you've got to, as a Westerner, you're going in with a very different mindset. So you've really got to remember that you are a guest in their country. You're not there to change their world. You actually need to respect them. And I found them very friendly and very warm and lovely people.
Excellent. Yeah, I think respecting the foreign culture is true no matter where you go, right? That you're not there to change your country. You're there to teach children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Saving money is important to teachers, especially nowadays in countries like the UK and the US, where our cost of living is going through the roof. Can you give us an idea of the cost of living in China and how, and if most teachers save money? Just, I think maybe some examples or just some insight into that.
So you definitely save money, and because in China you can also decide at what level you want to live. So you can live extremely cheaply, even in Shanghai, which is an expensive city in China, because you can shop for local produce and you can buy your vegetables for very little. 50 RMB would get you a full bag of vegetables for the week. Your utilities are extremely low. The highest we ever paid for a month was about 1,000, but then we had the heaters on 24 hours a day for a month. And that's why we paid so much. But normally we were paying about 100, even less. And your gas bill is like, 30, 40 RMB. So it's very, very cheap. I think, so quite a few of my friends, they paid off their student loans. People who came, especially like America, the loans are pretty high. A lot of the people paid off. I've had friends who saved up and were able to go home and buy a house. We saved an enormous amount of money. We were lucky with the exchange rate. I know you mentioned the exchange rate before, and because our rand slipped into oblivion, we actually were scoring on the exchange rate. And I was sending half of my salary home as a complete bottom line. There it goes. Half of my salary goes home. I don't see it. I don't live on it in China. And I always had money in my bank account. I never, ever felt like I was going to run out of money. And we traveled and we didn't live at a local level. We lived at a much higher level and we had more than enough money.
And that's with sending half your money home.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And then that money was what we saved, which was fantastic. So
it is amazing. It must be amazing to go home after so many years abroad and just have this giant nest egg, right? It's what security.
it is.
Having had a great time doing it.
Exactly.
Now, what kinds of teachers do you think are best suited to China? What personality traits are important, both from a positive and a negative standpoint?
So I think probably my most important one is to be flexible. And I think this is a positive and a negative. You can look at it both ways. You're going into a country that is totally foreign to your way of thinking and your experience. Unless you've lived in Asia before or you are Asian, it's very, very different. The way they think is different. You mentioned, Chinese, they have to have a Chinese person in the company. A lot of the schools are Chinese run, even if they are international. And coming to terms with that, a lot of the times you think, well, it's just China. So you have to kind of work with that. So you have to be flexible and you have to realize that you are the anomaly. You're not the norm. Shanghai's got 25 million. I'm one person. So I'm the one who has to be flexible. So definitely you need to be flexible. You need to if you are a person who is everything is right or wrong, you're going to struggle, because a lot of you need to be able to be comfortable with contradiction and comfortable with things that are not necessarily your way. It's very, you've got to, I wrote some things down here. You've really got to be able to embrace change. You cannot be rigid. You need to accept diversity. You need to be able to embrace and appreciate and listen to all sorts of cultures. And that's true wherever you go in the world. But China is very foreign. It's very different. It's amazing and it's incredible. That's why we stayed so long. We loved every single minute of our time there. But you have to be open. You have to be able to be aware that other people, there's no wrong way. It's just different. So you need to be comfortable with those kind of things that aren't necessarily what you think or what you believe. So flexibility, huge, huge, huge.
Absolutely. And I think you've got to be resilient, I think both personally and professionally, don't you? Because you're gonna, there's so much you don't know, especially when you first go there. So if you're the kind of person that has to know absolutely everything, you're gonna struggle because you can't. You just can't.
I think you also have to make sure, you have to learn to rely on other people. So within your school, you need to find friends. You need to find people that you can connect. You need a community. And mostly the expat community, the school becomes your community, becomes your place. But you need that, because there are days which are, we would call them China days, where everything goes wrong. And we would have, my husband he would welcome the new teachers in every year at the school. And he would say, you will have a China day. And when you do, just take a breath and it'll be okay. You just got to get through that day. There are days when everything goes wrong and you just do not understand what is going on. And you miss your home so much because it's so different. So you need other people. It's very difficult if you're a lone ranger. I don't think that's a good idea, because
I don't think they'd last anywhere, frankly.
Yeah.
But China is an extreme case because the culture is so deep and so different.
Yes.
And finally, what kind of places did you travel to? I mean, one of the reasons people go abroad is not just to make money and professional development, but also to travel. So in your 10 years, can you give us some ideas of the places that you travel to on your weekends and breaks and your favorite travel memories?
Okay, so we did Asia. So we traveled to India, we did Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, went to Bali, you go to Singapore, Philippines. My one regret is I never got to Japan. I was going and then COVID hit, which was terrible. And so probably one of my best memories is when we went to Vietnam. We didn't slum it. We enjoyed different experiences, and we went to Ha Long Bay on the boat, and you go with these beautiful karst mountains. And when I came back, my bank balance hadn't really changed because Vietnam is so cheap. So that is one of the huge benefits of travel in Asia, is it's really, really inexpensive. So your furthest distance you would travel would be Thailand, which is 5 hours away. But everything else is 4 hours, 3 hours. If you want to, you can get a direct flight to the Philippines. You can be on a tropical island, and the color of the water is exactly like they show it in the postcards. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? And I mean, we've got beaches in South Africa, and you go there and it's like, this water is exactly like they show on the postcards. It's amazing. It's amazing. And the people in Asia are so friendly. Everywhere we went, it's a beautiful place to travel. The people are lovely. The sights are incredible. The cost is amazing. So you could go away. We spent a long weekend. We went to Taiwan, and then, you can go to Hong Kong for the weekend. You can go to the Hong Kong Sevens if you're into rugby. So every holiday we traveled. We didn't stay in China unless it was COVID, and then we couldn't go anywhere. But nobody was going anywhere.
Nobody was going anywhere.
No. So then it was
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, you were earning those very high Chinese salaries, right? So
Um,
then you were able to access all of that travel, even
yes,
the, yeah, so you actually had the best of both worlds, I suppose, in a way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It really is amazing. You have enough money to live well, and you have enough money to travel and save. That's why China is really so financially it's incredible, but it's an amazing country. It's really really worth. People think, oh, China, it's incredible. It's such a good country to be in and live. It's really good.
Absolutely. Fabulous. All right. So I would recommend anybody listening, if you have other questions for Glenda, put them in the question and answer, and we'll get to them at the end. So Glenda's not going anywhere. So, all right. So I'm going to move on, just cover a couple of more points, and then we'll get to your questions. Thank you, Glenda, for that. All right, so considerations when deciding to teach abroad. As Glenda was saying, sending money home. So you are almost always paid, unless you go to a country where the currency is so volatile. So for instance, Myanmar, you might be paid in US dollars, but in most other countries, you're going to be paid in the local currency. So if you've got to send large quantities home, you have to deal with exchange rates. And so just keep that in mind. Sometimes it can work for you, sometimes it can work against you. If you've got a family, partner, or pets, pets are very difficult to import, and I wouldn't recommend it. We've had more jobs fall apart for pets than anything else. It's just, I love pets. I've had pets, but pets and international school experiences don't tend to work together. And if you think about all the travel experiences Glenda had, you can't do that if you've got a dog waiting at home for you. So if you are thinking about teaching abroad, what we had to do was when we moved abroad, we gave our pets to my in-laws, who then wouldn't give them back. So it was like it actually worked out pretty well in the end. But do think about your pets. Can you live without them? If you can't, then you might want to put this off. Partners, if you've got an unmarried partner, normally you cannot sponsor them, nor could the school sponsor their visa if they can't be employed by the school. So if your partner, I don't know, is a chef, or if they've could maybe get a TEFL certificate to teach English as a foreign language, they need to be able to get their own visa. So you need to be looking at whether they can or not. So if your partner is in the building trades, they would need to be speaking Chinese. They'd need to speak Mandarin if they're working on a building site. Can they do that? This is what you need to consider. And then finally, with your children, you need to make sure that the job is suited to them. If your children are going to go to the school that you're working at, is that the right environment for your children? That's what you need to consider. Health and pre-existing conditions, there are health checks that are done to go to China. So they do an x-ray. They're looking generally for the big three, which is tuberculosis, HIV, and hepatitis C. But they also look at other things. So if you've got pre-existing conditions and you're working with us, please do let us know, and we can let you know whether it would be a problem or not. You need to make sure that their medical insurance covers that. So if, for instance, I don't know, you're diabetic, you need to disclose this to the school during interview, because you need to make sure that their medical insurance covers you if you should have an incident. And as we talked about, personality. Do you have the personality to go abroad, and do you have the personality to teach in China? I think one of the things I've personally found is that you have to have a really good sense of humor, because you're going to be laughing at yourself a lot. Other people are going to be laughing at you as well. And if you can maybe not take yourself too seriously and see the humor in it, you end up with some really good stories to tell over dinner parties. Typical requirements. Typically we're talking about mid-tier, upper-tier international schools and or bilingual schools, so the kinds of schools that we will work with. You would need a PGCE, a Bachelor of Education, a Master's of Education for primary or secondary, elementary, middle, high school. So it is the same kind of certification that you would require to teach in your home country. A bachelor's degree is a bare minimum. If you don't have a bachelor's, you cannot get in. And your early career teacher, your ECT or probationary year, can rarely be done abroad. In China in particular, they do require a minimum of 2 years to teach in an international school. So obviously, as a newly qualified teacher, you won't have that. So that's an issue. They do want to see evidence of getting academic results. As Glenda said, the schools are academic, and hers is not unique in that. Most international schools, it is a cultural thing where education is really highly valued, culturally valued. So they want to see you getting academic results. When you do your CV, I would recommend you put in things like increased attainment by X in this year, or if you had especially good exam results, put that stuff in, because that's what they're looking for. There is a maximum age, which is 56 in China, and they start getting twitchy right around 52, 54. And there is a minimum experience of 2 years post qualification. They want to see recent teaching experience, teaching what they're hiring you for. So if they're hiring for a history teacher, they want to see you teaching 2 years of history at the right level. So they don't want to see, I don't know, a high school English teacher. They're probably not going to hire you for primary. They want to be able to see your results doing what they're hiring you to do. They also prefer that you've taught in the curriculum that they use. So if, for instance, you're a teacher coming from South Africa who's not taught the British or American or IB curricula, you are going to be on the back foot. So you're less likely to get picked up by a British, American, or IB school. They're going to look to find British or American IB experienced teachers first before they look at you. So you just have to get to the back of the queue. It's not to say it's impossible, but it's less likely earlier in the season. You need to have good references. They will check your references, and especially the top tier schools are all about child protection. So they will phone your references, they will check your references. They are not just going to accept a piece of paper with something written on it. You will need to get an appropriate clean criminal record check. That is part of the visa requirement. So if you do have something on your criminal record check and we're working with you, do let us know, because we can let you know if it'll be a problem or not. If it was from 20 years ago and it was, I don't know, speeding, unlikely to be a problem. But if it was anything to do with drugs, alcohol, stealing, anything like that, and it's recent, it could be a problem. And finally, they're going to expect you to be culturally sensitive and aware. Now, what do they actually look for when hiring? They are going to first look for people who are a low visa risk. So it takes them a long time to get a visa. It's very expensive. So they're going to be looking for things like your experience. Do you have a degree in what you're teaching? Although that's not required, it gives you that sense that you've got the subject knowledge. China has this thing, and I'm going to use their words, not mine, native English speakers. And what that means is you hold a passport from a country where English is the lingua franca. It is also shorthand sometimes to mean developed English-speaking countries. So US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa. Those are the big countries that they're looking for. If you're primary or if you're an English teacher, you do have to have a passport from one of these countries. So if you are a teacher who's born and raised in the UK and you have a passport from Sweden, I'd recommend you go get that British passport, because they're looking for it, regardless of where you were born and raised. Teachers who can add value, as I said, you want to make sure that on your CV, to get their attention, you are listing the good academic results you've got. You're listing your co-curricular activities, your extracurricular activities, how you've added value to the wider school. Have you done training? Have you run after school clubs? Chinese schools are more academic than most, and they're more into education. So instead of making a CV that looks like a job description, I mean, I know that you marked papers, and I know that you went to parent meetings, and I know that you taught your subject. But what were the results of that? And what did you do around that? That's what we're looking for. They're looking for teachers who fit within the culture of the school and the country. As Glenda said, the country and the school are the hand and you're the glove, and you need to fit them. They are not going to fit you. And we've talked about the resilience. And finally, I probably said this 3 times, didn't I? But the academic results are important. So if you've got the curriculum experience, they're going to pick you up first. If you don't have the curriculum experience, you need to have a really kick-butt CV with all of that adding value on it to get their attention. Timelines. There is no set time when schools hire. They typically have 1 contract renewal per year. So unlike the UK, where you can quit 3 times a year, it's not the same way internationally. It's usually once. So typically, they're hiring for an August start, and that green bit from about now through to maybe March is the high season for China. The dark green bit is the last minute ones that they can't fill, but those, they tend to get quite twitchy because they're uncertain they can get you in on time. So it takes a while for that visa. So that's kind of the danger area where they start to come to us and say, we want people already in China. So the real high season is starting now. We're probably going to have an event for the school that Glenda went to, and that group in November. And November through probably end of January is the real peak. Finally, how it works. First, you need to research. You attending this webinar is certainly the first step in that. But buyer beware, right? Don't assume you need to do your research on everything. You then make applications. They will do interviews, whether it's in person, but most likely online. And once they think that they want you, they'll send you an offer and or a contract. An offer letter might be something that just says, here's your salary, here's the benefit, here's the package. It's not the real fine print contract. That will come next. So you sign the offer letter saying, yep, I agree, I want this, then they'll start the contract. So it just is a time-saving thing to get the negotiations or any issues out of the way first before they get their legal department involved. But you will have an offer and a contract. Then you go through the visa process, and there's parts that you have to do and there's parts that the school has to do, and it will take at least 3 months to get it, and possibly more. You get your visa, then you do your air ticket, and then you arrive and they meet you at the airport. You get your orientation and you start your job. Okay, let's go to questions. Let's see what we've got. Okay, question and answer. Okay, so the first questions is, what is the workload like in international schools? I think we've talked about that, Glenda, right? So it was more than in a state school at home.
Yes, yes.
And what in terms of prep every night, how many hours of prep would you say a teacher should do?
A lot of my friends would prep into the night, especially primary, or if you are new to IB, you would spend a lot of time prepping. My choice would be to stay like till 7 o'clock at night at school, rather to work till the end. When I'm finished, then I go home. I don't like working at night, so I would just stay, because school finishes at 3:30. So you have to be there till 4. So, and we're in winter, it's already dark, so you might as well just stay and finish your work.
Do your work, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, super. And as you said, you didn't really work on weekends as much.
No, definitely not. There's no sport commitments or clubs. Most of that happens during the week. So your weeks are very busy, but your weekends are free mostly for you to do whatever you want.
Okay, super. All right, second question. Are there opportunities in China in international schools for teachers to easily progress and take on greater responsibility? Glenn, do you want to take that? And then I'll put in my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think it does depend on you and the school, but I think in the interview phase, it's a good idea if you're looking for, more than just the job that's required. I think it's good to show, to say that, no, you are looking for leadership or you are looking for progression, because schools are always looking not just for the job that they have advertised. So I was responsible for hiring a lot of people. So I know that when I'm interviewing somebody, I'm looking for not just what you can do, but who you are and what your ambitions are. And can I know that I've got this things coming up in the next year, so I'm kind of earmarking you for that or whatever. So there's definitely progression opportunities.
Fab. Yeah. And I would say one thing to keep in mind is that international schools are by definition transient. And that means that they turn over staff much more so than a local school. Typical number across the board is about 20%. So a typical international school will turn over 20% of staff a year, which means that there's always going to be new opportunities in a bigger way, I think, than at home, where people are kind of get settled and live there for their whole lives. So I think from an international perspective in general, you're going to have more opportunity. You do need to have some self-awareness. I mean, we get applications from, let's say, a teacher with 2 years experience saying, I want to be the head of the school, right? That's kind of diluted. You can't be the head of the school. They wouldn't hire you and they shouldn't hire you to be head of school. So don't delude yourself, but keep your options open and express, if you're ambitious, where you would like to go. And I think that's a good look.
I think just on resilience, just to touch on the resilience here, because it's so transient and there's a turnover, you have to make sure that you make friends every year. And that's something you need to be aware of. I think especially if you've got a family, because your children's friends also leave. And so you have to deal with the fact that it's not just your friends leave, but your children's friends leave. So you've got this thing every year. There are 2 periods of uncertainty when the teachers are making up their mind, are they staying or they're going, and everybody gets twitchy. And then towards the end of the year, everyone gets twitchy because, you know, everyone's leaving, but that's never true. But you do have to actually have a lot of inner fortitude and make decisions for yourself and not based on what everybody else is doing. So you have to kind of keep yourself, okay, this is what I want. I'm going to focus on what we're doing here.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, on the plus side, you end up with friends all over the world.
Yeah.
So you have friends that are teaching or have gone back home, and you end up with this real international network, which is fab.
It's good for travel. You've got lots of people to stay with.
Absolutely. Okay, next question is, can you describe what the dynamic is like for teachers working in international schools in China who have a native Chinese teacher working alongside them? I know you've had this.
Yes.
What does a typical primary teacher timetable look like for a teacher in an international school, and how many subjects should a Western teacher typically teach? Ooh, tough questions there.
So I'm not a primary teacher, but I've obviously know a lot about I've got lots of friends in primary. So our system, you had a co-teacher who was Chinese, and then you were the Western, and you both worked together. Ideally, you both worked together. You came up with ideas together. You planned together, and the Chinese teacher would teach the Chinese. You would teach English. You would teach the other subjects together. So depending on the makeup of your class, how much Chinese translation is needed, or you know, that would work. So the co-teaching model can be amazing, and I've got lots of examples of people who've done incredibly well. Every now and again, it's not often, but there's a clash, and so that is very difficult to work through. But it's not, that's very rare. That's not the norm. The norm is that you actually work really well together. Primary school timetable, primary works hard. They work hard. They're always complaining about how many reports they have to write. The demand of the level of feedback, the parent demand is huge, especially in primary. The parents they're paying a lot of money, and they're expecting you to give them feedback, check on their children, make sure that you're communicating with them. So you are doing not just teaching their kid, but you're actually having to do a lot of work with parents as well. And I'm not sure how many subjects you would teach. You'd probably do topic, English, maths,
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the school. So typically in an international school, you're going to be teaching the usual English, math, science, but they're going to have specialist teachers for PE, art, music, drama, unlike the UK system where you do everything. So it's a little bit more like the American system where you've got specialist teachers. If you go into a bilingual school, then you might actually be only teaching English, for instance, at primary level, or you might only be teaching English and science at primary level. So there's a number of different ways that it operates, and it's going to depend on the kind of school that you're teaching in.
Ask in interview, please ask.
Yeah, and I'd say Glenda's school, where you were, they use a co-teaching model. Not all international schools do. So yours was quite unique in that, and I think it probably helped you assimilate a little more quickly, but it's
I
not
think,
the only way to do things.
yeah.
Okay. Is a COVID vaccination required to work in China? That's a good question. I don't believe it is anymore.
Oh,
It was when you were there, obviously,
yeah.
but I don't believe it is anymore. I think we do try to keep track of this, and I will double check on this, but I'm pretty sure that you don't need it. There is a medical check,
Yes.
but I don't think it covers COVID vaccinations.
Okay.
Okay, great. So it looks like we've got all the questions answered, and I just want to thank Glenda for her time. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. It's great to have somebody with so much experience in China who's not in the Chinese time zone, so we could do this,
Yes,
and you don't have to
exactly.
get up at 3 in the morning. so, so thank you very much. And if anybody has any more questions or concerns, you can write to us, write to your recruitment consultant, or to us at teacher@edvectus.com. And thanks again.
Thank you.